where's the bell? Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Dear members, dear colleagues, dear guests, my name is Ulrike Diebold and I'm the Vice President of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and on behalf of the Academy's presiding committee, I would very much and warmly welcome you to today's event on the occasion of the International Women's Day. Every year, the Academy is taking the specific date as an opportunity to honor the research achievements of its female members, and this year as a public part of the General Assembly of the Learned Society. This is an important sign. The Learned Society of the ÖAW consists of full members, corresponding members in Austria and abroad, each in the division of Mathematics and Natural Sciences and the division of Humanities and Social Sciences, honorary members and members of the Young Academy. So the total number of Academy members is currently 752. And if you look at the number of women, non-binary and diverse people amongst the members, then it's still very much in the minority, just under 25%. However, I think if you look in the future, this might change, because when you look at the different age groups, there's a more rosy picture, not yet there yet, but a little bit better. So for example, 51% of the members between the age of 31 and 40 are women, 63% between the age of 41 and 50, and 41% between the age of 51 and 60. The Academy has an equal opportunities plan that was introduced in 2024, and that set a clear goal. The goal is that by the end of 2026, women should make up at least 45% of members under the age of 60, and fortunately, this goal has already been achieved with currently 48%. So the proportion of women is steadily increasing in all member categories. For example, the number of full members has increased by almost 50% over the past 10 years, from 28 to 39. That about the numbers. Now let's talk about something completely different. I don't know if you read in the news, but a few weeks ago, the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, announced a new initiative. Since its construction in 1889, the Eiffel Tower has displayed in gold letters the name of 72 French researchers, all currently men. And now she has decided that the names of 72 female researchers from various disciplines will be added at the Eiffel Tower. Hidalgo wants to counteract the so-called Matilda effect, which describes the systematic suppression of women's contributions to research and science. Female members of the Austrian Academy of Sciences were also affected by this Matilda effect. For example, the physicist Lise Meitner, who in 1948 became the first woman to ever be elected a corresponding member of the Division of Mathematics and Natural Sciences. And Meitner's contributions to the discovery of nuclear fission was not properly recognized for a very long time. A similar initiative, also at a much smaller scale than the Eiffel Tower version, was implemented at our academy in 2023. So downstairs is the club room at the ground floor, and it features a painting that was painted in 1912 by Olga Prager, and it depicts the Imperial Academy of Sciences at that time. So there's numerous of white-bearded scholars that reflected the society's composition at that time. 3 years ago, on initiative of my colleague in the presiding committee, Christiane Wendehorst, the artist Tatiana Lecomte started a reframing of the work by inscribing the names of the Academy's female and were requested diverse non-binary members around it. And every 2 years, following the elections, further names will be added to the walls. So after the lecture, I would invite you to go downstairs in the club and look at the painting and maybe take your picture with Instagram. In recognition of the work and achievements of women is a really important goal of our academy. We know that it helps promoting equality and diversity, for example, by encouraging young female researchers to pursue scientific careers through role models. The figures show that there's still a need for action in this area. While women have made up the majority of students in Austria since the 1990s, they still account only for about 30% of professors. A similar picture can be seen at the ÖAW's institutes, where women make up less than a third of group leaders or senior staff. This so-called leaky pipeline is real, and it must be addressed decisively with a variety of measures. These include, for example, fellowships and grants for outstanding women, such as the L'Oréal Austria Award for female researchers in medicine, natural sciences, and mathematics. Further role models can be found in the exhibition Discovering Female Researchers, Women at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, that is curated by the member Brigitte Mazzol, which has already been shown in Vienna, Innsbruck, Leoben and Linz, and currently is on display in Graz. Furthermore, the Academy's website features biographies of late female members, which are prepared again by Brigitte Mazzol and historian Sandra Kloos. They are being supplemented on an annual basis and bring female scientists back in the spotlight. Now, I would like to warmly welcome our two members who will speak today, Anaïs Angelo, senior researcher and Elise Richter, fellow at the Institute of Cultural Studies at the Austrian Academy of Sciences, and Francesca Ferlaino, professor of physics at the University of Innsbruck, as well as scientific director of the Institute for Quantum Optics and Quantum Information. Our member, Verena Winnewater, professor emeritus at the Book University of Vienna, will moderate today's event and soon introduce the speakers in more detail. I probably don't need to introduce Verena Winnewater to you, but I'll still do so anyway. I can say with great certainty that she is one of the most dedicated members of our Academy, whether as the deputy chair of the Commission on the Defossilization and Carbon Neutrality of the European Energy System, as seminar leader, as mentor and member of the advisory board of the Studienstiftung, or as chair of the Women's Committee, to whom we owe today's event. She was voted Scientist of the Year in 2013 and has received numerous other awards, including an honorary doctorate from Aalborg University in Denmark and das große Ehrenzeichen des Landes Kärnten. Dear guests, I wish an exciting evening with interesting lectures and lively discussion. And dear Verena, I'm delighted that you will be hosting this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Ulrike Diebold. I'm excited to have been asked to chair this session. This is a panel of survivors. We all survived the leaky pipeline, and it's still very leaky. We do celebrate today. In German, some women say this is not the day of celebration, it's der Frauenkampftag. And I wish that it were no longer necessary to call it that it would be just a day of celebration. But today we're here celebrating excellence, and all three of us here on the podium are delighted to see so many of you here interested in sharing our excellent members. We have come a few steps from the time of the suffragettes, but there's, I think, still work to do. The Women's Committee, which was already mentioned, has tasked itself with making sure that the 8th of March, the International Women's Day, does not go unnoticed in the Academy of Sciences. And sometimes when the General Assembly of the Academy and the 8th of March somehow coincide, we try to merge these two events. What is going to follow is me introducing both speakers, one after the other. I'm going to keep this very brief. Then we will hear two presentations, and we've agreed that although they are different, they do have enough to link them that we can discuss them together. And afterwards, after the discussion, I will hand over to President Christiane Wendehorst for her closing remarks. As has already been mentioned, Anaïs Angelo, the first speaker, studies colonial and post-colonial history and is an Elise Richter Fellow and Senior Researcher at the ÖAW's own Institute for Cultural Studies. She works on state formation, on women's history, and on biography. She is the author of Power and the Presidency in Kenya, which came out with Cambridge University Press in 2019-2020, and newly upcoming with Oxford University Press, Gendering the Post-Colonial African State. She's also co-editor-in-chief of the Revue d'Histoire Contemporaine de l'Afrique, an elected member of our Young Academy, and she serves on the Women's Committee. So both our speakers tonight are not just excellent scholars, they also engage themselves in the promotion of women in science. Francesca Ferlaino studied physics in Napoli and earned her PhD at the University of Firenze, Florence. She came to Austria in 2006 as a Lise Meitner Fellow and quickly established an extremely successful research group at the University of Innsbruck, where she is a full professor and also director of the Institute of Quantum Optics and Quantum Information of the Academy of Sciences, of which she is also a corresponding member. As she has recently been elected as the Scientist of the Year, you might have read in the papers that she studies ultra-cold quantum gases. She's not going to talk in detail about this research tonight, so we'll keep it warm. Yeah? She is also the co-author of Women for Quantum Manifesto of Value, and she founded Atominnen, a network to promote women in one of those fields where women are definitely underrepresented. And she will talk about the power of inclusion to us, whereas Anaïs Angelo's talk is going to be about the changing meanings of International Women's Day from collective solidarity to individual empowerment. And I'm looking forward to your talk, Anaïs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be here today. Let me just put this. Good. Okay. So, Women's Days have been celebrated for more than 100 years, and in many different ways. But in many instances, Women's Days have been about power and how women relate to it. And in the next 20 minutes, I'll try to explain how and why Women's Days have come to embody the struggle to make women more or less politically visible. So the history of Women's Day is closely related to the history of women's right to vote. And originally, Women's Days were used by American suffragettes to press for women's suffrage. But it was in Europe that the idea of formalizing Women's Day took ground. Clara Zetkin, who you see here, was a prominent German socialist who called for the creation of a special Women's Day at the Second International Conference of Socialist Women, which was held in Copenhagen in 1910. And you see some of the women speakers here. Zetkin's idea was to create a secular holiday that would encourage women to mobilize and would strengthen agitation for women's suffrage. And this was quite a controversial idea back then, because many European male socialist leaders were against the idea. So for militants like Zetkin, it was important to make women's vote a visible political issue. The idea of Women's Day celebration spread widely across Europe, but it caught the attention of an influential Russian revolutionary, women's activist and politician who also attended the International Socialist Congress in Copenhagen, who knew Zetkin, and you see her holding, the two of them holding hands, and her name was Alexandra Kollontai. And Kollontai, as a Marxist revolutionary, favored the idea of using Women's Day to organize women's workers. Now, at first, the Bolshevik Party was pretty much against the idea. It even ignored it, ridiculed it, but it gradually changed its opinion because it saw it as an opportunity to enhance its promise of emancipation for all workers, both men and women. And because the party believed that women wouldn't be interested in traditional politics or wouldn't be capable of being interested in traditional politics, the Bolshevik Party thought that Women's Day could be the opportunity to create a more ludic, more festive celebration of politics, women's politics, that would be then enable them to reach out to women. What the Bolshevik did not estimate well was that Women's Day could be a pretty powerful tool of mobilization, and they could not have imagined that the demonstration that Women's Days, the demonstration that Russian women organized on Women's Day in 1917 would eventually spark the Russian Revolution, and forcing in just a few days the Tsar to abdicate and paving the way for the Bolshevik Party to take over power. Now, eventually, Russian women continued to protest because they were not immediately given the right to vote, which they also demanded. They were not only demonstrating against the degradation of their living condition, they were also demonstrating on Women's Days for emancipation. And so here you see them demonstrating again, but this time in June 1917, when they were given finally the right to vote. And this is what happened throughout Europe. Women's Day celebrations were effectively used for women to gain the right to vote. Here you see Danish women celebrating their victories after several Women's Day celebrations. So here it's in 1915, and I'm sure you know that Viennese women were one of the first to also mobilize on Women's Days on the Viennese Ring, and here they are demonstrating for suffrage in 1918, the year they would finally be granted suffrage. Now, with more and more countries giving women the right to vote, the question became, what would be Women's Days about? What would be the purpose and the meaning of the day? Some, like Alexandra Kollontai, wanted the day to mobilize women around class-based struggles. And others wanted to give it a more feminist outlook. What you see here is the cover of the first issue of the French feminist magazine, Her Stories, that's the translation of the title, Histoire d'elle, which was published much later, but is interesting because in it, scholars argues that feminist activists have been consistently, since the early 1910s, sidelined from the history of Women's Days. But the debate is about a bigger question, in fact. It's about women's relation to power and to state institutions. So the question was, should women collaborate with established state institutions to be more effective, or should they preserve and strengthen their autonomy and their independence, and use, for example, Women's Days to demand more changes from the state. Now, these questions are still going on today, but what happened, they continued to be debated over the years, but in the 1970s, they took on a global dimension. And it's not by any chance that International Women's Day was created in 1975 by the United Nations. And that's actually the day we're celebrating today. So in the 1970s, the world is quite different from that of the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, you know that by then the Cold War is going on, and you also know that the Cold War was not just about the competition between the Western and Eastern Bloc over politics, military arsenals, economics. It's also a competition over visions of progress and modernity. And besides the Cold War, there are also waves of decolonization going on. And we don't talk about civilization anymore. We need a new global discourse. We talk about development, international cooperation. But in this context, women's issues and women's rights became useful tools or strategic tools to measure, to give an idea of a measure of progress and modernity. But they also became useful to foster a new sense of a global solidarity. So in 1975, the United Nations declared that year to be International Women's Year, and it organized a major world conference on women's issues. It was the first conference that brought together women from the so-called first, second, and third world to discuss women's issues. So many different topics were discussed, from domestic work and equal pay to imperialism and decolonization. And what the conference showed was actually that women disagreed throughout the world on what women's rights or women's issues were. But it also showed that women wanted to agree, to get us to find a common ground of discussion. And so in this context, it was important and necessary to foster this discourse of global solidarity, and there came International Women's Day. So the idea of the day was revived during a panel discussion, and you see a picture of this panel, and which was called A Sense of Balance. And I think the title gives you a good idea of what was the objective: to come to a consensual definition of International Women's Day. In a way, this attempt to define what International Women's Day could be was concretizing or realizing what Clara Zetkin has been hoping for at the beginning of the century, to make women's question matter on a global level. Now, the declaration that the United Nations made on International Women's Day was very broad, and it was also very long. It's a formal declaration that says that, taking into account that secure peace and social progress, the establishment of a new international economic order, as well as the full enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms, require the active participation of women, their equality and development. The United Nations invited all states to proclaim any day of the year as United Nations Days for Women's Rights and International Peace, and eventually it became a little bit shorter. So what this globalization of International Women's Day did is that it turned this day in a global resource, and it gave the day an unprecedented level of visibility. International Women's Day was a resource that women could use to frame their political, social, and cultural claims. And one of the examples of the extent to which this was a powerful resource happened on 8 March 1979 in Iran, as Iranian women mobilized on Women's Day to protest the new Islamic regime and the growing restrictions on women's freedom. And one of the slogans of this massive demonstration was, "Freedom is neither Eastern nor Western, it's universal." So that very much shows how important it was to have this global discourse on women emancipation and solidarity. But unlike the Russian Revolution, these demonstrations were rapidly and violently repressed. And what does it tell us? It tells us that if it mattered for women to control the meaning of International Women's Day, it also mattered for states to keep their hands on it. Now, this process of control, of state control, did not express itself only through repression. In fact, when the United Nations institutionalized International Women's Day, they also, to a certain extent at least, gave states a ready-made tool or a useful opportunity to appropriate the day and use it for their own purposes. So I'd like to conclude this presentation with an example of how International Women's Day can be appropriated by the states, which under cover of promoting this global discourse of women emancipation and women's solidarity, women freedom, uses the day in fact to reinforce authoritarian and conservative ideas of political and moral order. And for this example, I focus on Cameroon, where every year the Cameroonian government issues a new wax print dedicated to International Women's Day. And here you see this year's edition, 2026, which exists in two colors, green and orange. And that is quite popular. That is worn by all women of all age and classes, can be also because it can be adjusted to different styles, as you can see on the picture. But most importantly, wearing this wax print is mandatory for all women who participate to the national parade that the Cameroonian government organizes on every 8th of March. So the idea is, so the obligation to wear the wax print has been in place since the year 2000, but the Cameroonian state has celebrated International Women's Day since the 80s. But the idea of this uniformity is that if women don't look the same, this would go against the message of equality that International Women's Day is supposed to represent. But in fact, this parade is very much about state control, and it is very strictly controlled by the government. And Nadine Washiku is one of the few scholars who have taken International Women's Day as a serious object of study and who has explained why and how this parade is about state control. And she wrote that the women during the parade march to the sound of a brass band and sometimes adopt military marching and saluting as they advance in front of the assembled authorities. Order is maintained by the police. Singing is forbidden on the ground that it might contain any hint of protest or dissent. Loyalty to the regime is expressed explicitly through rallying cries and other slogans. So with this parade, the Cameroonian government demonstrates its commitment to a global feminist discourse. And here you see the First Lady, Chantal Biya, presiding over the parade. So it's very important for the government to show that they are endorsing this discourse of emancipation. But at the same time, the government was also very careful to remind all women of the limits of this discourse of empowerment. And it did so in a very explicit way in an official brochure in 2012, explaining or reminding at least women what Women's Day was not about. And it says, Women's Day does not encourage women to be disobedient towards their husband. And more importantly, Women's Day does not mean that women will take over power. Now, International Women's Day has never been about women taking over power. This is, of course, an authoritarian misreading of what the day represents. But International Women's Day, if we have to summarize what it is and try to redefine it maybe, it has been about asking for a fair representation within state institutions. It has been about asking for more than visibility. And in this sense, it has been about building a truly democratic societies. And that's why Women's Days have never been about women's only. And that's also the reason why International Women's Day have been so heavily debated over the years, continue to be debated today, and hopefully will continue to be debated in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you so much, Anaïs, Angelo. While Francesca is getting her machine ready, I have the opportunity to tell you that I learned a fair bit about Women's Day today. Thank you. Francesca, you ready?
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
So first of all, I hope you can hear me. And first of all, I would like really to thank, let's say, all the organizer and all the person that today make, let's say, this moment possible. And I would like really to take the opportunity before going on to really ask for an applause. I mean, for Ulrike, for all the incredible person that they are really supporting this type of event. So I am a quantum physicist. I'm not an expert on women topic. So in a way, I just would like to offer my point of view, but it's not really a study in the same way that it was extremely, let's say, impactful, the study that Miss Angelo was showing us a few minutes ago. And so to start to give you a flavor, I would like a little bit to try to explain you, just to give you some idea on quantum physics and why nowadays more and more you hear about quantum physics in the public, in the journal, and that there is many different ways you can explain why this is now becoming so impactful for our society. I just choose one of the possibility. So first of all, I like very much to start, let's say, with the sentence from Erwin Schrödinger, and because it tells you a lot about how we think about quantum physics. The task is not to see what has never been seen before, but to think what has never been thought before about what you see every day. So we see every day this beautiful city. And what we see every day is our classical world. But we can see the reality around us in a different way. And we can see it in terms of the basic constituent, which are atoms, which are single molecule, or they are really light, let's say that we call photon, like particle of light. And this is really the world where quantum mechanics is about. So quantum mechanics is not something that is abstract. It's something really just looking at our reality with a big, big, big loupe. Let's say we are magnifying our reality and looking at what is extremely little. This year, we celebrated the 100 years of quantum mechanics, which is the physics of what is very tiny and what is very cold. So these first 50 years, I would say, of quantum mechanics, so really was called like the first quantum revolution. Why was called the first quantum revolution? Because this new type of way of thinking about nature with new type of rules that were so different from classical physics start to be established. At that time, the founding father of quantum mechanics could not think how impactful all this would be. And actually, the first generation, in the first quantum resolution, it was not really clear what were really the application. But soon after, the first set of application coming from quantum concept were the transistor, lasers that we use every day, atomic clock, and even GPS that you use in your mobile phone. All these devices, strictly speaking, operate like classical device, but has to, and actually they are extremely important. For example, the transistor itself is what you use in any computer. You have many, many transistors. We will come back to this, and they are now so widespread technology that every second of our life, more than 20 trillion transistors are produced in company. All these devices, as I was saying, let's say in a way they need quantum mechanics, let's say to give, let's say the range of parameters, but at the end those are really more classical devices. In the second quantum revolution, it is about really try to build up, to have an envision really full quantum device for having all the power of this new type of way of thinking. And I would like just to give you an example why it's important, why it's becoming our everyday importance by asking the question how and when has the today quantum science become maybe the technology of the future, why it's become relevant. And so I would like to say that, this has a very different path. From the point of view of really physicists like me, like my colleague here in the audience, many things started also with, let's say, Feynman challenge in the 81. He kind of was asking if it's possible to create, let's say, a universal computer where the law of how a computer is calculating the things was based on this new quantum logic, which I will not explain today what it is, because it's not the right place, but ask me later if you want. And so the point is that he envisioned really this universal computer. It doesn't matter how this is manufactured, but that will use this new type of quantum logic. And for many years, all this thought were remaining very much related to the work of scientists in the laboratories. But then it came many breakthroughs, and I would like to highlight one, which is from Peter Shor and in '94, because he showed that actually if you use this quantum logic and you use it to build up an algorithm, let's say a code, then what you could do actually, you could hack every security system in a matter of seconds. All what you use today to encrypt your credit card number is based on very big prime numbers that are simply very difficult to crack. But he was showing theoretically that actually using the power of this new type of logic, it was possible to do it in a matter of seconds. Then the interest starts to grow. We see an application. And what is happening there, and was also the experimental and the theoretical thinking about using quantum logic was developing more and more. And so like in the '94, Sirac and Soller, and so this is, I think Austria can be really proud of all the milestones that have been made by this country and by the scientists in this country. It was really, let's say, developing this concept that maybe we can use these tiny atoms or, let's say, or this tiny molecule in which every atom can be our unit of logic. And as you know, then the things were developing a lot, and there was a Nobel Prize in 2012 for the ability now to really be able to experimentally manipulate this very tiny building block of the quantum technology. This was extremely important, and I would like now just just keep in mind, this was the point of view of scientists. What is the point of view of classical technology? Now, how do we communicate? How communication and computation was developing? The first idea really it's going from the 19th century. So if you send a wave, maybe an electric wave, you can encode information in this wave. That was the first type of information. And then this became a telegraph by Guglielmo Marconi sometimes later. And there was then more or less in the same years we were discussing with Anaïs, Angelo, there was the first transatlantic transmission, no? And then you also got the Nobel Prize. Then this idea, what was the idea of communicating at that time? You send a message which is basically low, high, 0, 1, on, off. Yeah, up, down. So it's binary. There is only these two states, down, up. And this is basically the Morse language. No? If you remember, there are only two signs, short, long. And then there was the necessity to, let's say, create an electronic device that was able to speak 0, 1. 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0. This object is the transistor. And this was the object, for example, that was at the base of the first sort of computer, if you want, that was this Turing machine. And then during the year, this transistor, from being extremely big, became smaller and smaller. So you had the first transistor here, where a vacuum tube, really very big, and then become much smaller, to the point to become really integrated circuit. So these objects that were speaking 1 and 0 were becoming more and more small and more efficient. And now this is an interesting plot because it shows, let's say, one has to ask how it's possible that my computer every year is lighter and smaller, but every year is more powerful. And the reason is that, let's say, in your computer, this unit that calculate, so this kind of transistor, become smaller and smaller, but more and more. This is the number of transistors over the year that it's increasing in a normal computer. But then you can ask, what is the ultimate limit? Because, now I have so many, let's say, millions of transistors in my computer. How big, how small they can become? What's the ultimate limit? And actually, nowadays, we are already at the limit that this unit is becoming on the size of an atom. How much energy do you need to activate a single transistor? It's 1 electron. Remember what I told you from the point of view of the scientist. Quantum physics is the physics of 1 electron, 1 atom, 1 photon, of something which is very tiny. So the classical technology is hitting really let's say, the frontier where quantum physics is popping up. So suddenly, all this, let's say, field of research became extremely important. And that's why, let's say, many scientists were kind of unifying themselves, and in 2016 they published what is called the Quantum Manifesto. Let's say a manifesto that were explaining why now we are ready to think about the second revolution and really detonate the full power of quantum mechanics in new devices. And just 2 years later, there was the announcement of the European Quantum Flagship. So where means that in 1 year, Europe was giving €1 billion to research. It's getting hot. It's getting important. It's getting something where there is good money. It's getting something when you can create company. It's getting something important for the society. And indeed, this was then a boom. Now, I don't want to enter in the different pillar of this quantum flagship, but every journal pick up on this new second revolution of technology. You find Q and quantum everywhere. Even my ski boot, I can buy a ski boot quantum. So it's really everywhere. Maybe it's for me too much, but okay. But somehow it's becoming important. Okay, and not only in the public perception, but it's becoming important for the company. So you have IBM, you have Microsoft, those are the big tech, but there are a lot of spin-off as well. And so then, we have to ask and also a lot of patent. You can see how many patents we're developing in quantum things just in the last few years. That's not the most, updated version, but you can see it. You can see how much money, so globally and broken down by country, has been invested in quantum. So just I want to, let's say, rise on you the tension that now it's important. And the quantum flagship that was in a way initiating in Europe and then US, China was following, of course, as a governance board of something so important. And the governance all is organizing in 3 blocks. Okay, 1 block is, let's say, what is called quantum community network. That's 1 block of governance, which is every EU country is represented in the quantum community network. Then there is the real central organ, that's the strategic advisory board, that's advised the full big quantum flagship of the European Union. And then there is what is called the Quantum Coordination Board, that is mainly, let's say, the PI that are project leader of the money. So those are, the pink one is people that got the money, this is the global board, and this is all the European member. And now you can ask, how is power distributed? And that's it's how power is distributed. Do you think that men are white or black? So there was one QCN member female, and deputy member maybe a little bit more. How is in the strategic advisory board? How is in the people that got the money from the EU? By the way, of course, to be nice and equal opportunity, the flagship have done a so-called EDI working group, so Diversity and Inclusion Working Group. I don't need to comment anything, so that's the beauty of number. And what happens at this point? I mean, this is at the beginning of 2024, and things have changed. And the Academy of Science maybe doesn't know the president is part of this change. It's also thanks to the Academy of Science that things have changed. Why? Because actually 3 important things came at the same time, I think. I mean, this is the percentage in case you want to know the number. So the 3 things that happened at the same time, one was the funding of this new platform that is called Atominen. That is a platform supported by the Academy of Science, only possible because the Academy decided to give money to this project. And I will tell you in which sense Atominen play a role. Then there was an important exit that I will tell you more about. And then there were women professors all around Europe that decided to, reflect on the concept of power, on the concept of governance together, and founded, let's say, a group of people called Women for Quantum. So the reason why Atominen has a place in this story is because this statistic was not available. And thanks to the fact that we had Atominen and we have one person working by Atominen that was, supported by the Academy of Science, we were able to put out this number. And we send exactly this slide to the European Commission. And they had to, this number have consequence, statistics have consequence. That's not, an opinion. And then this became important. There was clearly a problem, but the number was hidden because nobody go and count one by one every project and look at 2,000 websites. We need to add the facilities allowing for us, and this was the platform supported by the Academy. And then the second thing that happens almost simultaneously, so Atominen was working on the data, and at the same time, one female member exited from the Strategic Advisory Board and wrote a letter really, let's say, complaining on the situation. And this had a huge impact, and that was extremely important. And moreover, there was a community momentum also simultaneously with, let's say, the establishing of these, let's say, Women for Quantum. Those are kind of some of the people that wrote the so-called Manifesto of Value in quantum physics. And you have to understand that this is all formed by senior professors that have more than 10 years in quantum physics. Okay, that they all went together to really write the Quantum Manifesto that have been now published in Communication Nature, in Communication Physics. And this had an impact because there was a reaction, and the reaction was, let's change the rule within the governance of the European Union, let's say flagship. And so one thing that was changed and was maybe the easier things to change, it's really that the community network, so where all the state members have to be represented, that this one should, by definition of the, let's say, term of reference, be 50-50. Every country has to send 2 representatives of 2 different genders. And another effect that everything, all this kind of momentum on this topic had, is that now that the Europe is finishing the quantum flagship and is starting a new things, which is Quantum Europe strategy, the value of gender is explicitly written in the governance of the new law that will be written at the level of the European level. So sometimes number matters, and now the situation is much better, if you see. So the quantum community center is really 50-50. The advisory board have been redefined and it's much more balanced. For the project, we need to wait the new, let's say, wave of funding that are coming. So, and this is what Atominen has done. This is a very nice picture from the day we celebrate here with the former minister, let's say, and I mean, also with our, let's say, vice president for the, philosophical classes here and humanity classes of the academy. And we had really a very nice moment of, let's say, celebrating Atominen that actually, I mean, in a way has the aim to inform, support, empower, connect. Let me give you, because I think number is what can help to understand few things. Now, if we want to inform, we can really work out number in the same way we did it for the, let's say, quantum flagship things. And so here what you see is what was already mentioned, the leaky pipeline. So if you think all the field and you go from bachelor student to master student, PhD to professor, and now it's all scientific field, okay, not only physics and not only hard, topic. So you see that you have you have something very interesting. At the beginning, you have more women starting than men, and then these, invert. This inversion, so that at the end of the career and seniority, men are more than women, that's what we call leaky pipeline. In physics, the situation is different because you have two effects. On the one hand, you have the leaky pipeline. You see women goes down in numbers. But on the other hand, also the initial number are very low. And what you can see, is whether there is a time evolution. We are speaking so much about gender, action. Is this changing over the year? Is it now better than 10 years ago? And so if you think about the geographical distribution, is very interesting. You see that Europe, is divided in two parts, basically, one blue and one orange. And actually what you would see that the averages are for, students starting physics, bachelor. So it's very interesting to think that ex-Soviet Union country, I don't have a reason for this. It's just I give you the number, have extremely large number of female enrolled. While, in the other country, much, much less. Austria has 24%, so it's a little bit below the European average. And at the end, also at the master level, you have the same type of division. Which is very interesting. It's also very interesting because many of these countries that have many female enrolling, those are countries which are defined by the European Union widening country, which means that they give as a, let's say, support to the research below, let's say, to 1.5%. So they are countries that are investing the less in research and development. And those are the one that has higher number of female. I don't know if this is a, let's say, a correlation or not, but it's a fact. Now, over the years also, one has to see that the number were not changing too much. Not at the bachelor level or the enrollment. This is the last 10 years. So maybe this tells us that despite all the activity, the raising awareness, and so number are not moving, maybe we're thinking about the problem in the wrong way, in a way. I don't have the right way, but this tells you that things are pretty stiff. And of course, at the end of the pipeline, so the professorship is also very interesting. So you have 12% of full professor in physics in Germany, 11% in Austria. Sometimes people say, maybe in other countries better. Not really. In Spain is 14%, in UK is 12%. At the end, this leaky pipeline doesn't matter on how many they start, really, whether they are 30 or 20, at the end we end up with this type of, let's say, number. And I would like maybe just to finish with some latest data, which I hope they will have an impact. What about recognition? Let's say also for the women that, they made it, they have their own group. What is the recognition in terms of prize? Now, prizes are very important in the academia. And so the German Physical Society has produced some data. Let me explain this data. So the Max Planck Medaille is the most prestigious award of the German Physical Society for Theoretical Physics. 98 have been given, so 98%, 98 have been given, that's the total number of 2% to women. The Stern-Gerlach is the most important for experimental, 3%. I mean, then things are really not going very well. That's the other one. It's the prize for outstanding work in solid-state physics by young physicists, 3%. Well, I mean, I hope that also this number will trigger a change of the way we are thinking. Another important change, of course, is not only informing, but supporting, empowering. So our platform is, having a lot of interview with many prominent, let's say, women physicists to also, spotlight. We are creating a database of women working in the field such that it will not happen that people can tell us, we don't have female speaker, because now we have all the database. We are, of course, supporting, creating all information that can be useful. We are trying to connect with many different, things and event and putting forward this, let's say, this idea of connecting, of empowering all together. And here you have so many activities that we did in this 1 year of work with Atominen. And I think on the one hand, if we are speaking about, making a more gender equality, for me personally, one thing that is very important is the feeling of community. And somehow, if you are a minority below 30%, you don't have a feeling of community. You are a minority without any critical mass. And this is something certainly very important. So our network is, of course, increasing. And I would like just to finish with the idea of what is the difference between equity and equality. And I found online this very nice image. That's inequality. What is equality? Well, the equality is to say, okay, then I give the same instrument to kind of everybody, but still the problem remains. What is equity? It's maybe to correct the measure in a way that everybody can access in the same way to, let's say, opportunity. What is justice? Let's put the three straight for everybody so that we don't need any more stairs to go on. And with this, I would like to thank you. And as I said, I'm not an expert on this field. I wanted just to share some activity and some observation. And I would like really to also thank the amazing group of people that decided to join us in this Atominen project. And most of all, I would like really to thank the Academy, because without the Academy, honestly, it would have been impossible. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for somebody who has no expertise in the field. This was, I think, very impressive. And it reminded me of one of these truisms that more water does not make the pipeline less leaky. Yeah? So you have to fix the pipeline rather than pour more water in. Both of these talks are now open for discussion. There is also a big online participation, and I will try my best to give the power of asking questions both to people in the room and to people online. One thing I would ask everybody in the room is, please wait until you get the microphone, and then please trust the microphone. As soon as you start talking, the microphone will understand that you do that and will switch you on. It's not necessary to tap it. It just hurts the people online, because when they have their headphones, they get a problem. And people online, the chat has been disabled, so if you want to raise your hand, please raise your artificial hand and I will try to let you into the queue. Who would like to ask a question to either Anaïs or Francesca? And I have to say that I can barely see you back there, so it would be really kind if you waved really happily. I warn you, because if you don't ask questions, I do. Okay, Ulrike Diebold here. Now, the first one was here. Ulrike? And then over there. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesca, for this very engaged talk. Wonderful. So the only thing is, I'm a little bit older than you, and for me, I saw a real increase, right? When I started, it was 5% women, and now it's 30%. And now it seems like there is a threshold, so it seems like no go any further than that in terms of students coming. Do you have an explanation for that?
So indeed, the number I was showing is a number for Europe that is roughly steady. In Austria, when we see only the last 10 years, was increasing from 20 to 28. And so there is a kind of a smooth trend up, so it's not completely saturating. There are some countries where it's going down. I don't know exactly why. For example, Poland was well above 50% and now is going down. I don't know exactly what is, let's say, the barrier, but certainly you are true. The number, let's say, are kind of universal at the end, so they are very stiff.
There was a question.
Thank you very much for both talks, and this question is addressed to Anaïs Angelo, if I may. Thank you so much for showing us the development of Women's Day, and I believe in your presentation you talked about women's global solidarity. And not only is solidarity, of course, a highly debated term, deriving first from sisterhood, then solidarity, and questioned throughout history. But I was also wondering if this idea of solidarity that you present goes beyond national and ethnic boundaries. You did show African examples, but I think critically so. But is there any connection, community, internationally, or is it just national events that celebrate Women's Day? And to follow this up, if I may, a second part is you introduced your talk by saying you wanted to trace the history from a focus on community to individual empowerment. And I think I was missing this individual empowerment a little bit at the very end. And I was wondering whether we have lost all common goals, community goals, or whether it's both still existing in just two different strands of celebrations of Women's Day.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure there are international events celebrating Women's Day in a transnational way, but I think despite the fact that these ideas of globality and solidarity have been heavily contested and are still contested, there was nonetheless this attempt to go beyond the divisions, and it was very strong in the 1970s, and of course that changed over time. But I think my point was more to show the importance of having symbols and resources that then can be used because they're being given different meanings. And I think in that sense, it's still an international event, but it's very much, the demands that women make on Women's Days are very much related to a specific context and political, cultural, social context. So they may vary. Have we lost the common goals? It's true that I have left out this question of empowerment because it was just too much for 20 minutes. But it's a the idea of empowerment was a very strong component of the discourse, and still of the United Nations. And there is a critique, and a post-colonial critique, which I think you will know, about for whom is empowerment? Is it for all women, or is it for women of color more particularly? And so there is this post-colonial critique of actually saying, well, there is no global dimension. It's still a program that is strongly colonial to a certain extent. So there is this critique, but I think the main limit of empowerment, and I think it's related to also what Francesca explained, is that empowerment corrects the numbers, but it doesn't correct the way we think about inclusion. And it gives the burden of correcting exclusion to those who are excluded. And that's one, on a global level, that's one of the critique that is being said against empowerment. And it takes, of course, different forms and at different moments and in different contexts. But that was the point about empowerment.
Thank you very much. There was a question over here. Maria Sibilia, I can see her, and then Michael Rösner.
Yes, so thank you very much for the nice presentations. And I'm always intrigued when seeing how different, let's say, what you showed for females studying physics, and if you compare the countries, and there are many other examples. So I wonder how much of this has to do with the education that is given to primary school and to high school. So since you have done this very nice research, do you know anything about that, whether this, physics is taught more intensively in those countries already at the level of the primary school, or do you have any idea about that?
So I think that this is an extremely interesting aspect to put on the balance of interpreting data. And many of these countries are these post-Soviet Union countries. And I think that the education was very different in the sense, but I'm not an expert, I'm a quantum physicist, so don't quote me too much. There was, let's say, in the education a bit more the idea that a student, a scholar, should be good in everything. And this everything, I think it's everything in this.
Yeah, thank you very much. Michael Rösner.
Thank you very much for both presentations, which are very impressive. But I want to question Francesca. I would prefer to do it in Italian, but we have to do it in English. Bearing in mind the title, The Benefits of Diversity in Research, you have shown perhaps not a perfect, but a very important shifting of the percentage of the presence of women in the European boards which make decisions on research questions. Can you also already describe if there are really in the content of the research programs effects of this shift?
Yes, thank you. That's a very important question. So first of all, I would like to take the occasion to highlight an aspect that I didn't really highlight. This change was also possible, and that's very important because so we need everybody to be on board for this type of really big change. So we need allies from every gender to make it possible. And I would like also take the occasion to also thank Jörg Schmidtmeyer, that was one of the person voting for, because he was and is still his member for Austria of the Quantum Community Network of the flagship, and he was voting in favor also and supporting this change. So that's the first thing to say. This big macro change need everybody. Okay? And then in terms of changing, I can just give you my perspective. Certainly the discussions are very diverse, and what we see is that in the discussion on how to make better policy ideas, let's say the quantum strategy for Europe, it's true that there are a number of much more flourishing ideas for different perspective. That's my personal feeling, but it's difficult to quantify this type of things.
But I think that you could use Michael Rösner's question in an even more pronounced way. Let me just ask, do you think that female quantum physicists do different things or do things differently?
I have two colleagues in the room. I would never dare to say with the... do we do something differently? Yeah, Marcus? I don't know. Certainly, let's say there is a little bit of shift of point of view sometimes in the discussion, or the way you pose the question is slightly different. Sometimes the way people pose a question give new idea. And so more different, you know, it's like Pirandello. No, you know very well, you can explain. So it's like having a light which is a multifaceted and multicolor, and depending on which side you see, new things are understood. And so in this sense, I think that plurality, it's a very important value.
Thank you, and different life histories make for different perspectives, definitely. Now, I'm giving you the power of questioning in a moment, but I think Ulrike wants to follow up on this one. Can we have her question first and then proceed?
Yeah, I'm not in quantum physics, but I'm also in physics, so maybe I can comment on that. So I think at first approximation, talent is equally distributed. I think we should all agree on that. So if you only have a small fraction of half of the population, then you don't take full advantage of the talent. I think that's for me the foremost argument why we want to have more women in physics and why we want to increase this number from 30% of students maybe up to higher, to the 50% we have. I don't know if I do anything different and my female colleagues do anything different, but I can tell you for sure that the way the lab functions and the way the lab operates is very different once you have a few female members there, and it's just a much more pleasant experience. And I think alone that's worth it.
Thank you very much. When I was leading big research teams, I always had the feeling that the more diverse the team, the better it works. Now, Ulrich.
I only want to say to the Atominen that they should not despair, because in any field, the situation can change a lot. So in my own field of linguistics, right after the Second World War, there were nearly no female full professors. Now, they have a huge majority in most countries, including Austria. And in my special field of language acquisition, this difference is even more. I have initiated, and I'm still heading, a cross-linguistic project where we men are just about 7%. I feel they are like a dinosaur, but no female participant has yet asked me to step down.
Thank you. Please, Francesca.
Thank you very much for your comment. I think, first of all, it brings hope for the future, which is very good. But I think it also opens a very important point of discussion, which is how do we certify that a measure was successful? So in your case, you're giving an example of something have changed and it was successful in maybe reaching a better balance. How do we study, certify how do we understand what has worked and then what has not worked? And I think that now I'm a little bit personally, I'm not a diplomatic person, I mean, I think it's obvious. I'm a little bit, start to become a bit, you know, again a new measure for the women, again a new idea, again let's reinvent everything, again. No, maybe we should not try to think about a new measure, but stop a moment and make a very serious evaluation of which measure worked better and why, and which one does not work and we can forget. So many times we implement new things, but then we need also a moment of digestion and understanding if it was a good idea, so to see the result. And I think maybe we can really learn a lot from other fields like yours.
So this is one of the powers of the academy, that physicists and linguists are in the same room. Ellie, I think it's Ellie.
Yeah, regarding the low percentage of women going into physics in the first place and also the leaky pipeline, I guess I'd like to raise the possibility and the point that also this distribution, that country distribution that you see is related to cultural perceptions and cultural differences in the in the perception of whether women should stay at home, whether they should work with children, whether the children should go to kindergarten early or not. I think, you know, coming from the US where women go back to work several weeks after having the baby, having been in West Germany, where you're considered almost a criminal if you go back to work before a year, and then living in East Germany, where, as you say, because of the Russian system, kindergartens were almost free, and women, you know, it was normal to go back to work. I think these very early perceptions are extremely important in terms of the perceptions of women of what they can do if they have a family.
Thank you, and I would like to share an anecdote here. A female member of the Academy, sadly deceased female member of the Academy, once told me that she was invited to give a talk at this event today, at the General Assembly. And she had a babysitter at home, of course, and it had been announced that her talk would start at 6, and she would be home by, I don't know, 7:30, and then the meeting, the closed meeting went on and on and on, and she was standing out there, and she was thinking, oh, the babysitter is going to leave before I can even start talking. This is not a common problem that has ever been related to me by any male member speaking here. So I think that these surrounding support structures do matter a lot. Yeah? Do we have any questions online? If you don't raise your hands, I cannot see that you want to ask a question, but we would encourage you to ask questions. Also, men are equally allowed to ask questions than women, but it is Frau Meinke.
Yeah, thank you very much for these nice presentations. There are certain sentences or statements that really stuck with me. And there was this one that you mentioned, Anaïs, Women's Days have never been about women only. And also what you showed, Francesca, to show, I mean, we're talking, including your last slide, and how Verena Vinivater summarized, more water doesn't make the pipeline less leaky. I mean, what this alludes to is that we need structural changes. So there's an elephant in the room here. And I might want to ask you this bold question. So what do you think, the two of you, are the most important structural changes that need to happen to really bring about justice, not just equity or equality? Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. I think, I'm not sure if this is a solution, but I think it's important, it would be important to stop thinking through numbers. That's what Francesca mentioned. But if we think about the early 20th century, women would not have asked for having 30% of women having the right to vote. It was the right to vote for women, for all women. And I think we've come to a point where we normalize the thinking in terms of minority because of the discourse of inclusion. And I think that's something that should change. And the way we can do that, I think, speaking as an historian, is simply to show that there is a history behind this, and we can write the history of how we think in terms of politics of numbers, and why and where this happens, at what moment. That's what I've tried to do, of course, in my research, but I think that's one of the main issues, that it's as a feminist, a philosopher once said, it's about restoring the other half of the sky. So we've separated something that shouldn't be, and we have to think beyond that.
I think that's really a very difficult question. And of course, I mean, I don't feel entitled to really give a solution, but I know that there is not an elephant in the room. There are many elephants in the room. And probably each of these, let's say, there is not one global solution. One has really to carefully, in a critical way, see to the different dimension and try to understand. What I think we should avoid is division. Division have never brought anything, and this is going a little bit what Ms. Angelo said. And so the measure for women were involving only women, the activity for women, you see all, no, so if it's a cultural change that we would like, let's say, to suggest, certainly this should be something that everybody identify the value. And so, because only in this way you get this change. I think that that's really important, to have everybody on board and to have the right balance and listen all the people to try to get a step forward. Certainly one thing that it's not happening, this is not help, is the public perception. So let's say there are a very famous, let's say, a movie, sitcom, whatever, that you kind of have the physicists, which are a bit nerdy, crazy, and so on, and the very cool girls is a little bit stupid. Let's say this, I don't think it's helping. I don't think it's helping to speak too much about role model. I don't think it's helping to speak too much about Einstein or Lise Meitner, because these, of course, there are people that, let's say, incredible figure that can inspire, but also create a distance. Because it seems that they are so good, so intelligent, so powerful that I will never reach them. Maybe we have also a little bit to normalize this sense. Maybe we have to use other words like the importance of a team, the importance of having power not only concentrated in one person but shared in a small group of people. Let's say these things might be important in a way, the way we discuss. And there is bias. I have a lot of bias in my hand. If I imagine that my car was broken and I have to go to a mechanical workshop to fix my car, I imagine a man welcoming me. I don't imagine a woman. So each of us have this kind of image that, of course, then you tend to go where you think there is more similarity to. So there is this similarity effect that is very big, not only between women and men, but also between nationality, between, I don't know, social class and so on. In a way, we need to go a little bit beyond this stereotype.
I'm soon going to wrap this up. So there's one more question in the first row here. And if you think of another important question to ask, make sure that you don't wait too long before raising your hand.
So I would like to share an observation. It's an optimistic observation, a positive observation in my view, as based on my role as a father of two teenage children, a boy and a girl. So I see basically the parallel evolution in school, in their environment. Of course, there's also a lot of, not only bias, there's also a lot of privilege. So I'm not sure how much this observation is statistically relevant. But what I do see is that at least in this age group, in this young generation, I do see a large level of equality, equal treatment, of respect between gender, of equal opportunities in education. And again, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of privilege here in maybe just our country, also our sort of level of society. But when I see that, I am extremely optimistic. Concerning physics, Francesca, I disagree with you that, and I do not want you, I don't want to let you out of responsibility. In my point of view, going also towards what Ellie was saying, I think one of the big problems of physics is it's simply very boring. The problem is the way physics is taught at school is a catastrophe. I mean, it's a miracle that anybody is studying physics. And one of the reasons why people are studying physics is because out there, out from the schools, there are role models. Yeah? There are people who write popular books. There are young teenagers who in their 15s start reading those books and become fascinated. And you know, one of the gaps that we have, there is not a book by quantum physicist Ferlaino. Yeah, there are many other books by other quantum physicists or physicists of a very specific gender. And I think this is definitely one of the reasons. So we need role models, definitely, and I see 3 role models sitting here, so it's also up to you. Thanks.
Okay, well, we are definitely not going to solve the question if role models help or if they don't help. What I found really interesting, and I'm going to wrap this up now, is that we started with an observation by Anaïs Angelo that the Bolsheviks thought that women would not be interested in normal politics, in the real politics, so there was kind of women politics invented for them so that they would eventually become politically active and could be turned Bolsheviks, if I understood you correctly. And I think that this is one of the dangers, that we don't do research policies, but we do these female research empowerment politics, yeah, which don't change the uphill battle, which you all said, yeah, by empowering those that have to do the uphill battle to do the uphill battle a little better, rather than creating an equal landscape. What I also, I think, was very, very interesting is that this connection between women and peace, which I find over and over again, is also stereotyping, of course, yeah, and what you showed in this Cameroon exercise, where everybody has to wear the same clothes, this total uniformity does not create equality, because we need justice, which means the right measures for everybody. So I think that this is at least one of the things that combine your 2 talks. I also found it extremely interesting, and I think that the Women's Committee is working on that you said how important the feeling of community is for your colleagues. And I think that there is not just the lone wolf syndrome out there for lone wolves of the male gender, but there's, as long as we feel alone, we act as if we were alone. And so I'm really grateful to the Academy for having financed Atominen. I can only agree with that. I think that what we discussed here in using the women's question is a huge question that every Academy of Sciences has to ask themselves, and this is, does it help to measure? Yes, of course, we need to measure things, we need to develop indicators, but indicators can create a life of themselves and by themselves and of their own, and actually might distract us from the real issues at hand. Not everything that can be measured is important, and not everything that is important can be measured, to quote, I think, or paraphrase Einstein. Just one of those role models. And in order to wrap this up, the president of the philosophical historical class is now going to speak to us. And I would like to thank you all for your being here and taking part in the discussion. And I hope that even those online who did not take part in the discussion feel included. Thank you very much.
Well, in fact, there's not much left for me to say. The most important thing I want to say is thank you. Thank you, Anaïs. Thank you, Francesca, for those fascinating talks. We really feel proud to see such brilliant and strong women being part of this academy. Thank you so much, Verena, for moderating this and for all your dedication to the Women's Committee. And thank you to the Women's Committee for putting together this brilliant panel. And thank you, everybody, for engaging in the discussion. Before I invite you all to a reception in the Assembly Hall, I would maybe like to share a few thoughts about on the main topic, diversity in research. And recently somebody showed me a social media post. Normally I don't look at social media posts, but somebody drew my attention to it. It was a post by Science, the famous science journal. And that drew attention to a study that was conducted in the US some time ago. It was called, What Does a Scientist Look Like? And so over 5 decades, school children between the age of 5 and 18 were asked to make drawings of a scientist. And being a mother of 4, I know how telling those drawings sometimes are. So what was the result of that? So in the 1960s and 70s, 1% of those drawings, I think a total of 20,000 drawings or so, only 1% depicted women. But that gradually grew. And when the study finished, it was an overall of, I think, 1/3 depicting women. And what was particularly encouraging, among the girls, it was a proportion of over 50%. And that was 10 years ago. So I'm wondering what that would look like if we conducted such a study today, and maybe in Austria. And maybe that is an idea for the science barometer, which the Academy is doing every year. I would really like to see those figures. And I'm quite positive that they would be encouraging. And why are they encouraging? I think, I have to say, I take Marco's side. I think role models do matter, and I think the 3 of you are excellent role models. And Francesca, I don't think you create a distance. I think you're really, really important for the young generation. I think that is really, really important. Thank you, Anaïs, also for highlighting that in your talk. Without these really amazing women, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I also think, Verena, figures do matter. So I think it's important. And that is also why the Academy, in its new equality plan, decided to have hard and fast figures and goals so that we get the numbers right. Now, I'm proud to say that concerning gender pay gap, glass ceiling index, the share of female members, we not only reached our goals, we also outperformed one or the other figure, but that is, of course, not a reason to kind of lean back and say everything is fine. I know we need to go on and to push further, but it's also good to see that things are moving and things are changing. And I think a few of you already highlighted that what is so important is the next generation. And I think this is why this Academy makes all these efforts with the vorwissenschaftliche Arbeit, so those awards that are given to school children, girls, and that go into the STEM fields, that write brilliant theses. That's why we have the Studienstiftung, the Study Foundation. This is why we have Academy in the classroom. So I think it's so important to address the new generation and make sure that things change. Well, I've already been speaking for too long, so all that is left is say thank you again. Please give a big hand to our brilliant panel. And now I'm happy to invite you all to continue our discussions in the assembly hall downstairs. We have a reception, so please make sure you don't run away but stay. I'm sure we will have a lot to discuss, not only about role models and figures, but on many other topics. And before you leave the Academy, please make sure you pass by the club room and, as we heard, take a photo and post it on whatever social media you like. Thank you so much and enjoy the evening.